Along with The Last of Us 2, Doom Eternal, Final Fantasy VII Remake, Cyberpunk 2077 will be delayed later this year. CEO Adam Kaczynski confirmed that the whole game has been playable for months now, but additional months of development is required to give the team enough time for playtesting, bug fixing, and polishing. Just this week, John Mamais, CD Projekt Red's head of the Krakow studio, was interviewed to give insights into Cyberpunk 2077's creation, current and future projects, as well as the possibility of expanding the game to the Nintendo Switch and VR. So development started midway when the team was working on The Witcher 3. 2 teams were set up, one for each project. Eventually, the Cyberpunk 2077 team focused their attention on The Witcher 3. Soon after its release in 2015, they went back to work on Cyberpunk. Cyberpunk 2077 was initially planned for release much earlier than 2020. Some people, of course, speculated otherwise, as the events of the book it's based on happened in the year of 2020. Just a quick background, in the world of Cyberpunk 2020, corporations took over the world with armies of cyborg assassins. Booster gangs roamed the streets, killing and stealing, while the rest of humanity enjoyed hedonistic lifestyles in the form of sleazy parties and bars. But your character can change all of these because of how you're programmed as a cyberpunk. In relation to Cyberpunk 2020, a lot of the stories have been lifted from the books such as Johnny Silverman, Night City, factions and districts, class, and skill systems. From the time CD Projekt Red released the first teaser for Cyberpunk 2077, a lot has already changed. What The Witcher 3 and Cyberpunk 2077 have in common is their RPG elements, but their main difference is the game design and the combat. Now, one of the more controversial topics is the team's decision to go purely first-person perspective with Cyberpunk. Some players, including myself, worry about motion sickness as well as character customizations, which we can't really see while navigating the streets of Night City. CD Projekt Red's argument is that the first-person perspective makes the player feel more invested and immersed in his or her character and therefore personal. Furthermore, all third-person cutscenes have also been removed. To make sure that the immersion factor is ever so present, the team decided to allow you to still have character control as cutscenes are unfolding in front of you. It sounds like similar techniques from Hellblade have been incorporated, where the distinction between the cutscene and the gameplay have been removed and taken as one scene altogether. The only third-person aspect is when you ride a vehicle. Now, to combat motion sickness, the team made sure to add in depth of field and head bobbing effect features to be toggled accordingly. So I'm assuming and hoping that standard features such as motion blur, chromatic aberrations, field of view are also there to further minimize motion sickness. Another controversial feature of Cyberpunk is the removal of choosing between male or female gender at the start of character creation. Instead, you get to pick the body and voice types for your character. CD Projekt Red stated that they aspire to be more inclusive by having the freedom to create any character players want. Of course, not all fans were happy because they argued that this move is a compromise to what should be standard in video games. I think this is a good move for CD Projekt because, first of all, this won't directly impact how you experience the game. It also perfectly caters to the cyberpunk world where unlimited body modifications are being made by NPCs who won't distinctly be male or female. The future here is that freedom is more prominent and accepted more than ever. Now, going back to character customization, given this freedom, players still have some limitations, They can't make hideously disfigured characters as there is a standard skeletal fit. In terms of gameplay, there are several types you can choose from. One of them is the non-fatal gameplay where, similar to Deus Ex Mankind Divided, you can hurt enemies without necessarily killing them. Basically, the non-lethal route is longer to finish as this takes more planning, time, and strategy to execute rather than the lethal one. I'm curious to see how different this will be from Deus Ex, which has other pathways to facilitate this type of gameplay. Now, to accommodate main storyline missions, there are 75 street stories, which should not be confused for minor activities. Think of these street stories as higher-tiered quests to further explore the world and to level up your character. Similar to The Witcher 3, these are all custom-made, so expect encounters to be memorable as opposed to filler quests which are designed to lengthen a game's playtime just because. The level of storytelling is also non-linear, so I wonder how they will execute this without causing confusion in terms of the logical aspects of stories. John was also asked if the team has had issues with Australian censorship because of drug use and sexual violence in-game. As a background, the Australian Censorship Board is very notorious when it comes to banning games. One specific criteria is sexual violence is permitted only to the extent that they are necessary to the narrative and not exploitative or not shown in detail. Rockstar Games and Bethesda both had to circumvent and rebrand portions of their games for GTA San Andreas and Fallout 3 respectively to be allowed in Australia. According to John, we are not going to water it down, but I don't think there are any situations where you can take any real street name drug and get a reward from it. And there definitely aren't going to be any tasteless sexualized violence either. We are not going to make a game where the player can do those kinds of things. It would be awful and tasteless. It's a matter of presenting these sensitive topics to show how integral the story and character progression is in Cyberpunk, without the need to feature these just for shock value. I have faith in CD Projekt Red that they will be able to pull this off because of how meticulous they are when it comes to piecing stories together, as we've seen in the Witcher games. We will also go through some of the topics that have not been further discussed in the interview, as these are not CD Projekt's main focus areas for now. We have the multiplayer mode and DLCs, which makes sense given that they're focusing on releasing the base game first and what happens after. I think the community's feedback will be of high importance before they discuss what will happen next, especially in terms of additional content. There are still no plans of porting this to the Nintendo Switch, given how huge and heavy Cyberpunk 2077 is. Then again, who knows? We might just get surprise ports one day, like what happened with The Witcher 3 and Thronebreaker. But this will probably happen at a much later time, after the multiplayer mode and DLCs have been released. Also, VR is not yet an option in terms of viability since it's still in the experimental phase. With CD Projekt's commitment to delivering 4K Ultra HD support for the current Xbox, they haven't thought about improvements on the upcoming Xbox Series X just yet. The interview concludes by talking about the game's aspects that have been overlooked. Features such as the real-time global illumination system, which according to John, no one in the public has seen how it's finally going to look. It's going to look more breathtaking than we've seen so far. Meanwhile, the acoustic system is expected to be very realistic to supplement how immersive and deep the game is. I'm definitely excited for what Cyberpunk has to offer in terms of unique story and gameplay. I have faith in CD Projekt Red that they will be able to pull this massive game off given their good history, not even good, but great history with the Witcher games. With that, I will continue to provide significant updates on Cyberpunk in the channel. Thank you again, guys, for tuning in. I'm Wisa. Please remember to subscribe and hit the notifications bell to receive updates on the channel. I will be back for more game news next week. Happy weekend!